Okay, here we go. Yesterday we evaluated functions. Today you learned something that is new to everybody. It is a skill that you have to do when you get to calculus. It's not too bad, but it is something you will have to focus. You cannot anchor your knowledge based on what you learned last year because you did not learn it. And if you don't learn it, it's going to cost you points on the test. We all good? Let's take it step by step. Here we go. Today we want to evaluate f of a plus h minus f of a all over h. And so what's going to happen is we are going to plug a plus h into the function. Then we're going to plug a into the function. And we're going to subtract them and divide it by h. Now, I could give you reference for why we like that. The deal is it comes up in calculus. Showing you the y right now really wouldn't connect for you very well. So I'm going to show you how I teach kids as they kind of organize their work. I'm going to do f of a plus h. And so part of what we learned yesterday was plugging in these function values and seeing what happens. So as I plug in a plus h for x, I get a plus h, that quantity, squared. Everybody okay with that? Now I'm also going to plug in a. What is f of a? A squared. Very important that everybody's okay with how I came up with those two pieces. Yes? I'm plugging the a plus h in the place of x. Better? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this thing right here and subtract this thing right here. See that? So that minus that. So it's this thing minus that thing. So a plus h, quantity squared, minus a squared. And it's all divided by h. Good. So the first two things I wrote down were just to help me as I then plug it into the entire formula piece. We good? Okay, now the first part is that, like on the test, I want to see that you could set it up correctly. The second part is to see if you can actually simplify it. It always simplifies really, really nice. And I'll give you a hint to what happens. First of all, we have to square that out. How do you square a plus h? Times a plus h. We did that yesterday, right? And we got a squared plus, remember what is in the middle? 2 of the ah's. Good job. Plus h squared minus a squared. All over h. So what will always happen in this situation is everything that doesn't have an h needs to cancel. Does everything that doesn't have an h cancel? Yeah. What cancels? A squared and negative a squared. Excellent. Everybody agree that everything else has an h. So then what can we do? You can factor out an h times 2a plus h divided by h. And the h's will then cancel. So two things will happen. Number one, everything that doesn't have an h will go away. And second of all, everything that's left over that has an h, it will cancel out with the bottom. So your final answer in this situation is 2a plus h. Not too bad? Okay, so we want to look at a couple other examples. This one's going to be nice and easy. I call it G in this situation. Let's just continue to call it F so we don't get confused, okay? F of a plus h. What's f of a plus h? Good. What do you think sometimes people forget when they write that out? They forget parentheses and they forget the minus 3. And just remember the spot where they plugged in the a plus h. Can some people see how sometimes people forget the minus 3 on the end? Got to remember that. What is f of a? 2a minus 3. Good. I've got my two pieces. Now it's time to make use of them. I take the top one minus the bottom one. And I'll write it out this time because people got a little bit confused first hour. I want to make sure that I'm clear. Minus, and then I'm subtracting the whole thing, 2a minus 3. And that's all over h. So first hour, I did not write this in parentheses. I wrote minus 2a and I wrote plus 3. Everybody see why? So now I'm writing so you can see we must distribute that subtraction sign always through the parentheses. Okay? All right, so what's going to, so I'll expand that out. So I have 2a, what? Plus 2h, minus 3, minus 2a, plus 3, all over. If it doesn't have an h, it should cancel. So it doesn't have an h, those go away. And the 3's don't have an h, those go away. You're left with 2h over h, which is dos, which is Spanish for 2. Very good. What do you think? Can you do it? Please take all your homework. We're not done with the lesson, but it's very important we practice now so we start to solidify in our brains. You want to look at problem number 9. Please try problem number 9. You can cross off problems 11 and 12. You do not need to do problems 11 and 12. Problem number 9 should be very similar to what we just did. Go ahead, see if you can set it up like we did and get it to work out. I'm going to come around and make sure that there's no points of confusion. Okay, eyes back up here. Please turn back to your notes, 5x minus x squared. So this is the point where you're doing these type of problems. You get used to in mathematics where you get done with a problem in, say, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. These are ones you have to be willing to commit a little bit longer time towards. So my challenge when I was growing up is I wouldn't take the breath and slow down and say, just wait. Finally, when I was doing my graduate work and each problem took about 2.5 hours, that's when I finally started to slow down, okay? So we got to take a deep breath and slow down so we don't make the mistakes. F of a plus h. What's different about this one is x goes in 2 different spots, doesn't it? So I'm going to have 5 times a plus h minus a plus h quantity squared. Can you see how that's going to be a little bit lengthy? Yeah, and then we also have f of a, which is 5a minus a squared. Boy, oh boy. Okay, we have to be careful, try to be neat so we don't lose our work. Sometimes people do, they can't read their own hand. Just graded a couple calculus tests last night. I saw people couldn't read their own handwriting as they were writing stuff down. They made mistakes because of it. So, especially if you write super small, might have to write just a little bit bigger so you can see. 5 times a plus h minus a plus h quantity squared. Then minus the quantity 5a minus a squared. All over h. Okay, let's see if we can get this. Just a small mistake will ruin everything for you. 5a plus 5h. Then what? Good, minus a squared. Minus 2ah minus h squared. Good, so you distributed your subtraction sign all the way through. Excellent job. Minus 5a plus a squared. That's all over h. Great. So in this situation, you see a lot more terms. And it always works out. It's really kind of fun. It's like, is there ever a problem where it doesn't work out? Everything that doesn't have an h cancels. 5a and negative 5a are gone. Negative a squared and positive a squared are gone. If that doesn't happen, you made a mistake. Everything that's left has an h, which means we can factor it out. I get a 5, get minus 2a minus h. And that's all over h. Those divide to 1, so I'm left with 5 minus 2a minus h. That is my result. I know, you're like, why? How would we use it? Okay, time will come where I'll explain that to you, but it is very useful. 2 more problems left for today before I let you to your notes. What's different about this one? A fraction. Okay, so, yep, exactly. So it is only normal to say the fraction piece, yes.
Just like for this, so you shouldn't have a fraction, but this should be like one number.
If you're given a polynomial, yes. So if we're given a polynomial like this, yes, you will not have a fraction. In this case, we will have a fraction. So there are times that you do have a fraction. Okay? So, especially when you have the fractions, that's where, again, you take that deep breath. You say, I'm going to slow down just a little bit to make sure that I'm doing everything appropriate. What is f of a plus h? Good. So I just say instead of the x, I have a plus h. So again, back when Miss Kruger was first teaching you guys function operation and she was having you guys plug in variables, you're like, why would I do that? That's all to prepare you for these moments which you will eventually use in the calculus. Now I have f of a, which is 2 over a plus 3. Now what? Good. Mikey sees it. He's 1 step ahead. Rachel says, let's subtract those. And Mike says, if I have that, I have a complex fraction. Remember, we spent time in class working on complex fractions for many different reasons. And right now, we can't leave our answers complex fractions. And you see a lot of things that don't have h's that aren't just canceling out. So we must work with the complex fraction. So I need to create a common denominator. So I multiply top and bottom by a plus 3 over a plus 3. Other side by a plus h plus 3. Exactly. We'll distribute a -2. So I start out with a 2a, then what? Plus 6. I like Kenny's idea. Let's have the value of the 2 be negative. So let's distribute a -2. So we'll get great. And we have a couple denominators here, don't we? That's divided by, now we have a plus 3 times a plus h plus 3. No need to multiply out the denominator. Let's just let it be. Something could cancel. Usually it's just the numerator that we work towards simplifying. And that's all divided by, and I'm going to raise h over 1. So you can see that you have a fraction over a fraction. Yeah, what do you notice cancels? Yeah, isn't that nice? Again, everything that didn't have an h is going to cancel. So what is the only thing you're left with in the numerator? And we said that the h should divide off. Well, instead of dividing by h over 1, we'll multiply by, yeah, so notice how this is going to go away. We'll multiply by 1 over h. And when we do that, yeah, your h will divide off right here. Yeah, so kind of this little bit messy work now. We get -2 over a plus 3 times a plus h plus 3. Did I ever say that all the h's will go away? No, but that h in the denominator will always go away. We have to make the h in the denominator disappear. You okay? You have excellent focus right now. You're doing a great job. Okay, last problem. Flip it over. We're going to skip letter M. So you can cross that out. And we'll focus on this one. F of A plus H. So what's different about this example? Yeah, you have a radical. So there's really three types of scenarios we want to investigate. Number one is the polynomial. Number two is a rational function where we have, fraction. And then number three would be if you have a radical. So that's what we're going to discover here. And you're going to learn something that's very useful at this point. We have the square root of a plus h plus 5. And then f of a is the square root of a plus 5. What's for supper tonight? What are people doing? I was thinking of burgers on the grill.
I was thinking pasta.
Pasta? Okay. Leftovers? Somebody said goulash. I'm not a big goulash fan.
Goulash? Goulash.
My dad makes like good goulash. Like my favorite goulash person.
Skip the goulash, go to the pork chops. I like it. I like it.
Would you put all of that under the square root?
No.
Because it's not.
Exactly. Exactly. Sorry to get you off track. My stomach is starting to get hungry. So, square root of a plus h plus 5. Sophie had the question, can we put them all underneath the same square root? You can't, unfortunately. Minus the square root of a plus 5. And then that's all over h. So if they were all underneath the same square root, then the a's and the 5's would cancel, right? But they're not. So how do we get rid of those? That's an excellent thought, and that's what most people go towards. But just remember that when you squared things, it was always something like this, like the square root of x minus 5 is equal to 10. So when you were squaring both sides, right? And you don't have both sides here, do you? You don't have something on this other side that you're squaring as well. So just squaring things in general doesn't work. It's not like you could say, well, I have the square root of 3. I'm going to square it, and now 3 is my answer, right? We don't have that. And so we have to, you kind of learn that the h is going to divide off somehow, and the a's and the 5's are going to cancel somehow, but we don't see a ready way to do it, do we? We're all stumped. And that's the point where we say, instead of doing math, we do Spanish. Yeah, that's the key. Doesn't that make sense? Who's taken Spanish before? Okay, all right, give me a verb in Spanish. What? Camina. What does camina mean? Walk. Okay. Is it camina or is it camina? Caminar. All right, so caminar, camino, I walk. Caminas, caminamos, caminan. Hey, what am I doing to the verb? I'm conjugating it. And when you conjugate something, it simply means that you change the ending. And when you change the ending, something beautiful happens. Watch. You guys are tuned in. You've got this figured out. The conjugate of a minus b is a plus b. Notice how I changed the operation? And when you multiply a minus b times a plus b, what do you get? A squared minus b squared. Wouldn't it be awesome if we just had this thing squared and that thing squared? And we could do that by multiplying by its conjugate. So the conjugate, and you're going to use this many times this year, we multiply by, I know it looks ugly, but trust me, the square root of a plus h plus 5, and instead of minus, it's plus the square root of a plus 5. Over, no, the square root of a plus h plus 5, plus the square root of a plus 5. Yeah, what is the square root of a plus h plus 5 plus the square root of a plus 5 over the square root of a plus h plus 5 plus square root of a? Yeah, that's 1, right? So that's totally legit, and you're like, that's the ugliest looking one I've ever seen in my life, right? But it's going to make it work for us. It's beautiful. When you don't know how to do the math, do the Spanish. And it's great. Watch. What's that times that? A plus h plus 5, right? If you take two of the same square roots and multiply them, the square roots go away. Now, watch this, because you know, like, we're supposed to FOIL it out, right? If you multiply these two, is it positive or negative? And if I multiply these two, it's, and they're the same things, but they'll go away, right? Right? They're gone. And then if you take this times this, you get a plus 5, but it's negative, right? So we'll write minus the quantity a plus 5. So you understand that a plus 5 is what we get, but it's going to be subtraction. Over, now the denominator, it's just kind of ugly. We have h times the quantity, that thing right there. Square root of a plus h plus 5 plus the square root of a plus 5. All right, we know the denominator ain't so pretty, but what about that numerator? What's going to happen? The a's are obviously gone, right? Are the 5's gone? Yeah, because it's 5 minus 5. Those go away. What are you left with in the top? See, everything that's left in the top has an h, so it divides off with that. So what are you left with in the numerator? You're left with 1, because h divided by h is 1. Okay? Sometimes people write 0. Does everybody understand why it's 1? Okay? So that's my result. I get 1 over square root of a plus h plus 5 plus square root of a plus 5. Conjugate. Multiply by the conjugate. Just like you conjugate a verb in Spanish, in German, in Greek, whatever it might be. Now, okay, so if you flip to your homework, I told you to cross off which ones? 11 and 12. So what this leads you into is, as some people have already done 12, is the next assignment says the formal definition of the rate of change. That's what this thing is called right here, okay? So I want you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But if you flip it over to the back side, okay, here's the ones you can cross off. You can cross off number 8, and you can cross off number 9. Everybody got that? So you could cross those couple off. Be good of you to start now. Try to get a couple done. Do some work this weekend as well. I will post the answer key. One challenge that we have second quarter, you guys, is the way the calendar works out this year. You have 39 days of second quarter. Do you guys understand that that is less than 8 weeks?
Yeah.
We have less than 8 weeks. That's one of the challenges that I have in trying to fit college algebra in to a semester, is we only have 39 days. So we have to make sure we keep pace. Okay, so this is a new thing. Spend some time this weekend. We can talk on Monday. You got 10 minutes. Go.